escape, eh? It's alright. I'm done running from you. Together, then. It's time to find out who we are, once and for all. Show yourself, Ifrit.
Final Fantasy XVI was released on June 22nd, 2023 for the PlayStation 5. Since its release, it has a score of 87 on Metacritic and a mighty open critic rating with a 93% critics recommendation. Suffice to say, the game's done fairly well. Now I know I'm kinda late to this review party, but I wanted to express my personal thoughts and take my time with FF16. Also, I don't get review copies. As of this recording, I only have 203 subs, so of course I don't get review copies. Hopefully, that changes later. But before we begin, this review will have very minor spoilers. I'm not going to talk about or show the final boss, any crucial story points, or anything like that. Just some conversations that take place maybe about 30 hours in, but nothing story heavy. In my demo impressions video, I stated that I was skeptical about FF16, and I want to clarify that it was because of two factors. First, the story. With its influences being taken from Game of Thrones, I wasn't too sure where the storytelling was going to go. The second skepticism came from the combat, and I want to clarify, I still believe that I was wrong on both ends of skepticisms. But let's start with the story first. You play as Clive Rosfield in the world of Valisthea, a world that has been stricken by a blight that is destroying natural resources. As such, kingdoms are at war to claim these resources. Within these kingdoms, there are slaves or bearers, as the game calls them. There are also some class differences and struggles with monarchies that look down on certain groups of people. It's within this storytelling that we see a more mature concept that I was honestly happy with. Most gamers are older to begin with, so sometimes an adult setting is more relatable than playing high schoolers in other games. FF16 even drops some F-bombs. Thankfully they're not obnoxious, they feel naturally used. Another excellent element of the story is the characters. As stated earlier, you play as Clive, son of the Archduke of Rosaria, who has been given the task to be his brother's protector. The younger brother Joshua is the heir to the throne because even though Clive is older, Joshua is what this game calls a dominant. A dominant is a person that can use the powers and transform into an icon. An icon is basically a summon from past Final Fantasy games like, let's say, Shiva and Odin. Clive is only blessed with some of the powers of Joshua's icon, the Phoenix. Clive himself is a great character. He isn't a one-note person that maintains a bland personality. He's kind, he shows empathy towards slaves, he cares deeply about his allies, and his brother. Clive is an impressive character throughout the entire game. When he's angry, you believe it, and when he cries, you feel it. And even though Clive is the main character, I want to emphasize that the majority of the side characters are phenomenally written. Some argue that they deserve more screen time, and there's some merit to that. But when they are on screen, they steal the show. Between Jill, Sid, Gav, Dion, and even the best boy Torgal, everyone has a compelling story to tell that contributes to both the main character and the overall storyline. I have to give major credit to the voice actors. This is some of the best work in Final Fantasy history. Final Fantasy has always specialized in tugging at those heartstrings, and this game is no different. There are characters you will love, some that you'll hate, some that you'll feel sympathy towards. It's just amazing that after all these years, Final Fantasy still manages to create the emotions that move you throughout the entire gameplay. Speaking of gameplay, let's jump into that next segment, starting with combat. Final Fantasy XVI puts most of its RPG identity to rest in this installment, and it isn't a bad thing. This time around, we have an action RPG with abilities that run on cooldown. Clive has short range and long range attacks, abilities map to the face buttons, and he can equip up to 3 icons at a time to perform these abilities. By mixing and matching the equipped icon, you can essentially create your own build. Final Fantasy XVI allows players the freedom to play as Clive as they see fit. Depending on your playstyle, equipped icons can have you act aggressive, defensive, there are icons that act more like trappers, etc. Upon winning battles, you gain experience points to level up and ability points to power up your abilities. When you master these abilities, you can freely allocate them to any of the 3 icons you have equipped for further customization options. The stagger meter also makes a return from past Final Fantasy games, which when depleted, temporarily knocks out the monster so you can deal more damage and even add damage multipliers. Depending on your build, you can focus more on either attacking the stagger meter or the enemy's HP. I personally like to attack the stagger meter. The game also gives you ample time to get used to icon abilities. Since icons are found based on story progression, you can take time to practice with the abilities you currently have unlocked. Though for me, since this game is kinda long, I got so used to my current loadout that I barely changed anything. But I'm also lazy, so don't follow my example. Experiment to see what fits you best. I also want to make it clear that this game is not a button masher. Strategy works differently this time around. You need to be aware of enemy patterns, and timing a dodge is crucial to success. Timing is tight at first, but you get used to it soon enough. Additionally, there's a parry system that works differently from other action games. Rather than just blocking on time, you can attack the enemy at around the same time that they attack you and the parry will activate, slowing down time for a brief moment. This is kinda hard to pull off, but when you do, it's very satisfying. Party members will assist you from time to time, but they are fully AI controlled. Torgal is the only character that you can give commands to. And if you dive deep into this mechanic, you can have Torgal do more damage when you complete a combo, and he can even set up air attacks for you. Now, icon battles were one of Square Enix's selling points. To summarize, eventually, Clive can transform into the Ifrit icon, and you can basically have King Khan versus Godzilla type battles with other icons. I'll be honest though, these were a hit or miss for me. Some of them were on rails and have QTEs, however there are icon fights that give you full control, and these were the ones that I personally fell in love with. They had more of a challenge and required more dodging while learning enemy attack patterns. That being said, all icon battles have eye-opening presentation value. Between the music and just the epic scale that each battle demonstrates had me at the edge of my seat almost the entire time. All bosses in general felt like I was fighting a final boss. The amount of excitement in each always gave me goosebumps. However, combat in this game has one flaw that I need to point out. Once I got the dodging down, I found the game fairly easy. But listen, I suck at fast-paced action games. I find games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta to be challenging. I mean shit, I play as Dex Bills in Soulsborne's games so I can keep my distance. Yeah, I'm a freaking Dex Bill, so sue me. But I think I can count on one hand how many times I got a game over. Now don't get me wrong, you'll be OP and look badass when you trample enemies in your path. If you're like me, you'll be zipping around the battlefield like a chocobo on crack. You can tell that Square Enix wanted FF16 to be an accessible title, but I don't know, it just wasn't that much of a challenge to me. There are even accessories you can equip to make the game even easier. Some will have Clive auto-dodge and another will have Torgal perform commands on his own. I honestly didn't equip any of these. On the other hand, I'll be upfront and say that I haven't played its New Game Plus or Hard Mode, aka Final Fantasy mode yet, and I heard that it's quite challenging. This also adds replayability value, and you can also bring along your abilities with you. Eventually, you unlock the Hideaway. This is basically your hub world where you can purchase items, craft weapons and armor, practice combat in the Hall of Virtue, etc. This is where the game also starts to open up with side quests and exploration. Just bear in mind that most of the areas in the world are unlocked with the story progression. One innovative mechanic that should be a new staple in any RPG is the Active Time Lore system, ATL for short. When you hold down the touchpad during gameplay or even in some cutscenes, lore and information relevant to your location and current party will pop up and also update throughout the game. In other words, instead of reading a long codex of world info, you can simply activate ATL to read what's relevant to your current location. And if you miss something, you can always visit the library in the Hideaway to read everything there. Lastly, later in the Hideaway, you can unlock a hunting board, which has you track down stronger monsters for better rewards. Keep in mind that reading a hunt notice will not create a waypoint on your map. You must read the notice and look for the monster with the clues handed to you. As far as the world map goes, this isn't an open world game per se. Areas open up and the story progresses in a linear fashion. You'll have various interconnecting zones, some are small, some are large, but again, they open up as the story progresses. Now, the exploration and the gameplay loop are where the game starts to show its flaws. Actually, I think this is a good time to talk about the flaws in general. First, let's get the performance out of the way. I mainly played in performance mode, but man, the frame drops are noticeable at times. This mostly happened during exploring environments. Thankfully, not during combat. I don't have the software to calculate the frames, that's what Digital Foundry is for. But I can tell you that it wasn't always stable. As far as crashes and bugs go, I didn't see any. Not once, so we should be good there. Now, the pacing of the game can be very daunting at times, especially during the latter half of the game. As a world-building narrative, the zones and side quests work great together. Narratively, most side quests tie in good with the lore and overarching story. Many side quests took me by surprise as to how emotional they are. I even got misty-eyed with some of them. You know how when the side quests in The Witcher 3 are like small stories? Well, many of the side quests play the same here, and they can be very rewarding with the storytelling and some crafting materials. Unfortunately, in the later half of the game, many of these are still your typical fetch quests, go kill these monsters, go talk to these NPCs, and you get the deal. Not only that, but the story and pacing severely slows down during the second half, which makes the rewarding side quests too far in between each other. Exploring the world itself is also a hit or miss, but let's be real for a second though. This world is beautiful, and there is a lot of world building to take in when exploring. But it's what you find item-wise that really hinders the experience. You mostly find some crafting items that you'll end up having a great abundance of, some gil here and there, and the occasional strong weapon or armor piece, but these are very spaced out. Basically, like I said earlier, the gameplay loop is poorly paced in my opinion. It's basically cutscene, MMO style exploration and side quests, go back to the hideaway and turn in said side quests, and a dungeon that moves the story forward. And just in case, no, I did not have a problem with the number of cutscenes. Final Fantasy has mainly been a story-driven franchise, so I was expecting this. Plus, the exposition in this game is not boring at all. Now, I want to briefly touch on the music for a moment, because if there is another area where Final Fantasy games never fail, it's in their soundtracks. Music in Final Fantasy games always play an integral part in the storytelling, and it's no different here. The tones of each track transition greatly with the moments of emotion. If a tear drops, a piano will be played to demonstrate the feeling and internal struggle of that character. If a battle goes into another phase, the music will swell with upbeat tones and choirs to further the intensity. Exploration will have compositions that are peaceful to show that there is an innocence in this world that needs saving. Each theme is brilliantly crafted to make sure that the player is invested in each scene. Moving forward, many, if not all Final Fantasy games have a general theme that they want to portray. Final Fantasy XVI, just like the music, is no different when it comes to their themes. It's consistent with what it wants to portray throughout the entire playthrough. Tackling issues like slavery, freedom, and the human bond is told very well. Minor spoilers incoming, but it shouldn't be a big deal, but skip to the next chapter of this video if you want to avoid them if you want. During Clive's journey, you meet Cid, and he has created a rebellion against kingdoms that are enslaving magic users. Eventually, he tells Clive what is causing the blight. And the way to stop the blight is by destroying the mother crystals in each kingdom. But by doing this, they also take away how people normally live. So the question is, do they destroy how people live? More importantly, there's a slight difference between Cid's and Clive's philosophy on the rebellion.
Cid, you once told me that you wanted to build a place where people could die on their own terms.
I did.
I've been thinking about that. Why not a place where people can live on their own terms? For 13 years, killing was all I knew. So obsessed with death that I never stopped to consider the lives of those around me. Lives that I see now were scarcely worth living. Be they bearers or beggars, most but march blindly to their end, never realizing that they too deserve a choice. And I dare not turn a blind eye to their suffering any longer.
So, atonement then, is it?
That was the answer we found.
The only one we need.
The difference between the freedom to die and the freedom to live can be seen as two sides of the same coin, and this is also shown in many parts of the game, including side quests. Many slaves wonder if freedom is worth it. Freedom is something that needs to be fought for, so should they die for a cause that has no determined victory? Additionally, the themes of monarchies and torturing those lesser than others is another consistency in the story. I won't spoil anything here, but I saw some complaints that the story shifts in the latter half of the game. I disagree. The theme of a prideful individual that wants to take advantage of those they deem lesser than for their own self-benefit is still a relevant topic. Alright, now for the big question, and this is something that I've been kind of wanting to talk about for a little while now. About 3 weeks have passed since Final Fantasy XVI was released. Since then, many conversations took place begging the question, is this a Final Fantasy game? This mainly came from a reviewer that, mind you, I still respect. I don't agree with all his points, but I still respect him nonetheless. Realistically speaking, a Final Fantasy game can mean different things for different people, and they're all subjective. I personally don't think that there is a concrete objective way to say what a Final Fantasy game is, because for the most part, they're different from one another. Final Fantasy II had a different level up system that, believe it or not, can actually be compared to Skyrim in a way. Final Fantasy VIII had the junction system. Final Fantasy XII had a more MMO style of combat. Mind you, this conversation isn't anything new either. When Final Fantasy IX was released, it received considerable backlash for its chibi art style. It was still turn-based, each character had a specific job, ATB was still there, and yet people still gave it a hard time. You wouldn't believe it now because not many people talk about it. But I'm almost 40, so yeah, I kind of remember. Now obviously I can't show Twitter screenshots of this because, well, Twitter didn't exist at the time. But I did find some forums from 13 years ago in Game FAQs and Giant Bomb. The Game FAQs post from user Albel4T5 can articulate this better than I can. Quote, when this game came out, Final Fantasy IX, most of the folks on our shores, being the US, had started their Final Fantasy runs with 7 and 8. Therefore, they had no nostalgia for the rest of the series to reflect on. Some of them were expecting another moody, quiet, and brooding type with a big, cool-looking, way too heavy to be practical sword, something Zidane lacked. Final Fantasy IX is lighthearted. Sure, it has its darker moments, but FF7 and 8 present a darker storyline, while 9 was vibrant in color and life. All in all, it was something that they weren't used to, or rather, something they didn't feel a Final Fantasy should be. Sound familiar yet? Despite being the only one in the mainstream on the PS1 to be an actual fantasy." End quote. Like I said before, saying what Final Fantasy should or shouldn't be is subjective. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what I look for in a Final Fantasy game. If the story moves me emotionally, makes me laugh, makes me cry, and makes me care about the characters, then I'm good. Now, I'm not saying that everything else should be mediocre, just that Final Fantasy XVI hit these points for me. It's flawed, and I pointed them out in my review, but my perspective doesn't decide what a Final Fantasy game is. I'm not a Final Fantasy XII fan that much. Does that make it less of a Final Fantasy game? Of course not. You're more than welcome to have constructive critiques. I'm not saying you can't, but your view is not going to change that Final Fantasy has always been different. Are some differences more daunting than others? Sure, I will happily admit that. But again, your opinion doesn't decide what makes a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy XVI gameplay has flaws, and I won't deny that, but the storytelling is really what continued to pull me in. I want to bring up another topic for 1 second. Some people mention that the lack of party members hinders the experience. I disagree with this from a narrative standpoint. While you only play as Clive, you still get a chance to interact with friends and loved ones in the hideaway. In a way, these people you interact with are your party members. They have great scenes together, stories to tell, and they contribute to Clive's constant inner struggle. They're his shoulder to lean on when the task at hand gets too heavy. It's in these moments where they truly shine. I'm glad that Final Fantasy XVI still pulled its weight with the storytelling, and it's an experience I'll be thinking about for a long time. Play to the end, because on a final note, I thought the ending was brilliant. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and comment below with your thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI and to, boost up that algorithm at least a little bit. As of right now, I'm at 203 subscribers, so feel free to subscribe because I have more videos on the way. I'm not much of a news or update channel, I just like to talk about how I feel about games, especially RPGs. Thanks again, and have a good one.
Why, the beast has the appetite of a behemoth. Just this very morn, I found him with his nose buried in my nuts.